Okay, so here we've got a sentence. Hi, this is a test. Now, I'm sure you can spot the fact that this letter here, A, and this word here, test, there's a huge gap. And we've also got the word this all in capitals. Now, sometimes when you get data in Microsoft Excel, it's often not in a good form in terms of it's untidy and it can't be used for further analysis. So sometimes in Microsoft Excel, you have to basically cleanse the data. So you have to tidy it up and make it so that you can then do some further analysis on it. Now, we're going to achieve this by using two Excel functions to answer our question of how can we space out the text properly and make all the lettering lowercase. So by space out, I basically mean how do we reduce this spacing to just a normal one space and make all the lettering lowercase? Basically make this word and the word hi, the letter H, all lowercase. Now, there's two ways we're going to do this. The first is using two formulas separately, and the second way is using one formula, but in that one formula, we will be combining two Excel functions. So in essence, we'll be using nested formulas. Right, so I'm just going to put a quick label here. First formula and second formula. Just so that it can be a bit clear. Okay, so the first part of the question asks how can we space out the text properly? Now to do this, there's a function in Excel called trim, and this function basically reduces all the excess spaces so that you're only left with one space between each word. So this is what we want to use. So if I press equals and type trim, you can see that we've got a little tooltip here, which is basically confirming the use of the function. So removes all spaces from a text string except for single spaces between words. Right. This function takes one parameter, which is the text we wish to trim. So I'm going to select this. Just one thing, folks, and that's this word test is actually part of this cell. But because we haven't widened the column, it looks like it's part of this cell here, but it's actually not. So when we're selecting this, that includes this word test as well. And just to show you what I mean by that, there, you can see that test is definitely part of the rest of these words. Okay, so I'm just going to go back and pick up where we left off. Right, so I've selected our cell. I'm going to close the bracket. There. As you can see, our excess spacing is gone. So that's how you use the trim function to get rid of excess spaces. Now, the second part of the question, how do we make the lettering all lowercase? Okay, so we've used this function before, the lower function. So we press equals, we type in lower. Now, we don't want to make this lowercase. We want to make the result of our text, which has now been spaced out, lowercase. So we're going to click on this and then close the bracket. There. As you can see, we fulfilled the second part of the question by making this lettering all lowercase. And the first part of the question, space out the text properly, has been fulfilled as well. So that's the first way of answering this question. We've got two formulas, they're both separate, and one just uses the other one's result. So how can we improve on this or evolve it? Well, we can combine these two formulas together. So we end up with one formula which just uses two Excel functions. Now, how do we do this? Or how can we do this, rather? Well, if you remember earlier on, when we covered brackets in Microsoft Excel. Now, remember that key element, whatever is in the bracket gets worked out, calculated first. So let's try combining our formulas. It's going to put a label here. Right. So how do we handle this? Well, because the last part of our question is the lowercase bit, we're going to make that our outer formula, and we're going to have that get its result from the inner formula, which is the first part. So if we press equals and type lower, we open the bracket. Now, this is the key thing here, folks. The lower function takes one parameter, which is text. But remember, formulas return the results always if they're typed out correctly. So knowing that, and knowing the fact that anything in brackets takes precedence first, we can insert our trim formula as a parameter here. So we type trim, and as you can see, trim is popping up in our drop down. We open the bracket. Now trim takes a parameter of text, as we know. So we're going to select this one. Now one thing to notice, folks, is that because now we've got more than one set of brackets, we've actually got a different color. So here we have black for the first set of brackets, which will be basically outside of here. And we've got our second bracket, which is part of the trim function. So Microsoft Excel color codes them, which helps you work out how many brackets to use when you're closing your functions. So if I put a close bracket here, we can see that it temporarily went a bit bolder, and it's indicating to us that we closed our bracket for the trim function. Right, so I'm going to put another bracket. Do you see that? It briefly bolded again, and that indicates basically that this bracket is closing that bracket here. So let's take a look at what we've done before we press enter. We've got our lower function, and it's basically going to apply the lowering of the words to the result that's returned by this trim function. So another way to look at it is, which is in the inner brackets first? It's trim. So this gets evaluated first. Then after that result is calculated, it then gets passed and used as an argument for the lower function. So this is what we call nesting formulas. We're basically substituting the normal parameter with a function, knowing that the function will return a result which matches that parameter type. So in this case, the trim function returns text that has been trimmed, and the lower function as a parameter takes text. So that's how we can put one function into another function as a parameter. Now, this is a very powerful way of actually combining functions together to make one formula. And there are pros and cons into whether you could do this method, which is taking it one step at a time, or combining them. But ultimately, it's down to what you prefer. Okay, so I'm just going to press enter. And as you can see, we've got exactly the same result that we had from this one. So that's how you combine formulas. Now, I just mentioned earlier that there are pros and cons to doing each method. Basically, it's all down to user preference. There are some people that might prefer to start off breaking down formulas, doing them in one column at a time, and using one result to feed off the other, like we did here. Now, the advantage of this is that you can easily space out your workings, and you can follow it through a bit more easier. The disadvantage, of course, is that it will take slightly more time to type out the formulas. Now, with combined formulas, the advantage is that it's all in one cell, and you'll save column space as well, because you won't need to use multiple columns. The disadvantage, however, is that they can be slightly more harder to read. So if I double click into here, this on first glance is slightly more difficult to read than, for example, this one and that one. And that's because it's been nested, so it looks a bit more complicated. So which one do you use? Like, which method? Well, as a beginner, I would recommend that you use this method first, the first formula and second formula. So basically you break down the formulas. And then what you'll find is that you will get the natural motivation to combine some of the formulas, just because you'll start to realize, hang on, maybe I don't have to space that one out, maybe I can just combine it. So think of it as an evolution of your formula building skills. But in order to get to that comfort level where you can combine formulas, you have to start off with the basics. So what I recommend is start off with this method first, and then slowly see if you can use this method. And a great way to actually check if you're doing it correct is simply to do what we've done here. So we've worked out the results here, then try combining the formula, and if you get a match like we have here, then you know you're on the right track. So this was a real simple example, but we've illustrated a really powerful concept of actually combining formulas. Now, remember those key concepts about the brackets, that whatever's in the bracket gets calculated first. And also remember that you can substitute a function as a parameter to another Excel function, provided it returns the same type. So in this case, our trim function returns text, which the lower function takes as a parameter. So that's how we were able to substitute one function into another Excel function. Okay, so that concludes this worked example. Let's take a look at another one.